Okay, so today we'll be going over the rest of the practice problems that I posted. I'll do some additional problems that address some things that maybe we haven't talked about in a while that could show up on the exam. I am planning on early next week, Monday, to do another review of some additional problems, but I'll get some additional problems up on Canvas with an answer key as well. I'll also get an answer key to the practice problems that we've worked through here the last 2 days. And so you should have a good amount of resources kind of study for this final. Hopefully, a lot of you are finishing up your projects. Some of you have already kind of sending them to me to maybe just look at a couple little things here and there, help with some of the data part. So feel free to reach out. Even if you have, sent it to me and we've kind of went back and forth a little bit about it, you make sure you post it on Canvas. So I want everyone to be posting their final project to Canvas. Okay. So we're looking at where we left off yesterday, and I'll type in the chat here so that if anyone joins in late, they know they can kind of jump in and ask questions. So we left off at 5, and so 5 says, suppose the NCAA allowed for there to be free and open labor market for college basketball only. Right? What would you expect the wages of schools like Louisiana Tech or Ball State, both located in cities under 75,000 people, compared to schools like IUPUI or Tulane, both with metro populations over a million? So what were you kind of comparing those wages, right? So I wanted to turn this into a short answer question. I might add show using graphs. So I could have done this as a multiple choice. Here I did change it to a short answer. I don't know why I phrased it like that. But if it's a short answer question, I can add, I want to see this depicted on a graph, right? So really the key here is what's the difference that we're thinking about. So I try to choose these schools to be as practical examples as possible. So when you've got schools like IUPUI and Ball State, they're pretty comparable in terms of quality of education, and the real difference kind of we're focusing on here is the difference in the city that they're located in. So for cities that are in a higher, or sorry, schools that are in a higher populated area, if we just think about the demand for labor is the marginal wins per labor times the marginal revenue per win, right? When we think about the demand for any one school, right, even if we think about kind of wins here, the demand and marginal revenue of a small market team, which remember, these colleges, once we convert this into a free and open labor market, it'll be very similar to small and large market teams in that if I have more people, that's going to drive up my demand curve, right? So then the marginal revenue per win from a large market team is going to be higher, which drives up the demand for labor, which if we have the demand for labor increasing, we would predict that those schools at like Tulane could pay higher wages than Louisiana Tech, right? So, anything that's going to cause differences in the demand curve for these schools, you would predict the wages at those schools, if the demand curve is higher, that they would also be higher, right? And even if we have roster limits, so this is a good way to kind of add in. So I think hopefully, here's the graphs. We could answer this, but I want to go a step further, right? So I'll redraw this in a second. So let's say we have this demand curve increase in the labor market because of a higher population, right? Right? More people, more potential consumers. So we've got our labor market here. Let's assume we got the same supply of labor in both areas, right? Players don't have preferences for IUPUI over Tulane, which actually I'll do another extension if they did, what this could look like. So let's just for now assume that there's only the demand differences. So we've got this demand curve for labor. But let's say that even in a city like Muncie or in Louisiana Tech, I think is it Jonesville or something? I forget the exact name of the city. But let's say that because the NCAA still has roster limits set, you can't just have 200 players on your team. That maybe the equilibrium they would desire is a little bit higher, but it's kind of, the NCAA tells them to have set here. Well, even there, if we see increases in that demand curve, so you can kind of think about this increase in the demand curve was because they were in a larger city with more people. So this was like the demand curve. Actually, here we'll say this was IUPUI. and this was Ball State. So here's kind of our wages. So IUPUI, and here would be the wages at Ball State. Sorry, I wanted to show this. I forgot that I'm doing roster limits. Scratch that. Okay. So here's the demand curve for labor for IUPUI. Here's the demand curve for Ball State. But we have this roster limit set, so we can't actually get to those equilibrium points. So what's going to happen is we're going to be stuck at this roster limit, but we know that the teams are willing to pay this amount, and so wages at Ball State would be here, but for IUPUI, they'd be willing to pay higher wages. So even if we have roster limits set, this demand being higher in these larger metro areas would still predict higher wages at those schools. So IUPUI or Tulane would have higher than Ball State and Louisiana Tech. And if you don't agree that those teams are similar in quality, choose there's probably some good examples out in California where you have much similar quality schools, but very different kind of metro area kind of populations. Let me think of even a better one here. In Michigan, there's probably a good one. Michigan would be something like, I don't know. I can't think of any other great examples off the top of my head, but this kind of get the idea here, right? So this is if we have roster limits. I also would kind of say one other thing you could think about that could change in an example like this. So hopefully we've got this down. So let's just say now, go back to the original. We don't have roster limits, like the original question actually had. I'm adding some things in here so we get additional practice from like one problem here. We're attacking multiple different things to get ready for this exam. So let's say I've got the supply curve for labor and the demand curve for labor at Ball State. If I believe that in large metro areas, not only is the demand curve for labor higher at a place like IUPUI, but also that the supply of labor is going to be higher, because for some reason there's a preference from our college athletes they'd rather be in a city like Indianapolis than in a city like Muncie. If that's the case, then you could expect maybe that the supply curve is higher in IUPUI too. So what's that going to do? Well, the demand curve being higher, right, is going to push. So the demand being higher pushes wages up and quantity of labor up. But that supply curve being higher would push wages down and the quantity of labor up. So we can't really say if there's any difference in wages if we factor in that there could be differences in the supply curve as well. So if on the exam, if I really wanted to focus just on one of these, I would tell you assume that the difference in the metro size doesn't, that players don't have any preference for Indianapolis versus Muncie, right? Now, if I left it open-ended like this, kind of think about what would the difference I'm explaining, how might it impact supply and how might it impact demand here, right? Higher metro area, more people definitely affects demand, but if it influences player preferences at all, if players have a better preference for one area, then they would supply more labor to that area or supply the same labor, but at a lower wage, right? If I think I'm gonna have a really fun time in Indianapolis versus Muncie, I'd maybe take a lower wage, because I get some additional utility there, so I don't need as high of wages to compensate me. Right? Okay, so that is number 5. Let's go back here. So number 6, suppose the NCAA allows bowl game payouts to be kept by the teams and not shared with the conference. And similar to the NCAA basketball tournament, there are guaranteed bowl spots for the winners of every conference. What would you expect to happen to competitive balance within the Power 5, within non-Power 5, and overall? So we've got 2 effects here, right? So yesterday I think we looked at an example where I had 1 effect. This is one where we have 2. We're now making it so that you don't have to share any of your bowl game money with your conference. That was the first. So we'll think about the impacts that would have on competitive balance. And the second is that we now guarantee spots for the winners of every conference, right? No matter what football conference we're looking at, they're guaranteed a spot in these bowl games. Right? And maybe if we have a high number of bowl games, because they kind of do this right now, let's say maybe, it doesn't have to just be the top team, the top 3 teams of every conference are guaranteed a bowl game, no matter if they have a positive winning record or not. Right? So, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to leave the Word document up and switch to the webcam. So, we can kind of think about, let's break this down, right? The very first thing is going to be that they allowed teams to keep the money. So let's keep track. So we've got competitive balance within Power 5, competitive balance outside Power 5, and competitive balance overall. So the first thing we had changing was they get to just keep all the money and they don't have to share it with the conference. So how is that going to impact competitive balance within the Power 5? Well, within the Power 5, if we don't have to share any money, the teams at the bottom are going to get worse and the teams at the top are going to get worse, so it kind of decreases competitive balance. Outside of the Power 5, it has the same exact effect, so it's going to decrease competitive balance. And then kind of overall, well, if every team that isn't making a bowl now doesn't get any money from their conference, the people who made it to a bowl in their conference, and all the teams that made it, which were higher quality, are going to keep that money, they're just going to kind of keep getting better, and the bad teams are going to keep getting worse, so we see overall this kind of hurts. Right? But now if we have kind of guarantees, what's going to happen? Well, now if we have this guaranteed spots for the top team or the top couple teams in each conference, well, within these conferences, because they get to keep all the money, within conference competitive balance, it's probably going to get worse. You could argue maybe within the Power 5, this doesn't really have an effect because even without the guarantee, they were kind of getting the same number of teams in regardless, right? That's like the top 3 teams were always going to make it from the SEC. So this didn't really have much of an impact here, you could probably argue. So you could argue that it didn't decrease anymore. But, right, the total effect, the combination of these two things would lead us to the same decision. Same kind of thing here. Overall, you could take a little bit different of a stance here because if all the top teams in each conference are receiving money now, for guaranteed, and they get to keep all of it, the best teams in each conference, even the small conferences, are going to keep getting better, but the bottom teams are going to keep getting worse. Now, how could this impact competitive balance positively? Well, if the top teams in the bad conferences are getting better, they now are going to be more competitive when they play the worst teams in the better Power 5 conferences. So you could argue that overall, guaranteeing these spots will help competitive balance a little bit when you see across the Power 5 and non-Power 5 conferences play. But now, even in those lower conferences, the best teams within each conference are going to be beating up on the teams that are worse. And so you're going to have a little bit of, across the league, the worst teams are getting worse, the best teams are getting better. And so maybe it kind of decreases a little. So it's kind of hard to say here, right, what the effect is there. But for sure we could say that within conference competitive balance outside the Power 5 goes down. Within conference competitive balance outside within conference competitive balance in the Power 5 also goes down. And here kind of indeterminate because there could be some positive impacts that we have with these guaranteed spots at the top, right? Especially if a lot of those lower conferences those schools weren't making it into bowl games before in those top couple spots. Okay. So a lot of times like these, and I get this kind of frustrates I think students sometimes, but this is usually the answer to things in life is that a lot of times it depends, right? And so really what I'm looking for in a question like this is explain to me, this why is the important part, right? Why are each one of these competitive, what are both of these, changes? How are they going to affect these competitive balance and why? And you may not get a conclusive answer at the end. You may say, well, look, we know there's competing kind of effects going on here. And so the answer is really we're not sure, right? Which is usually in the case where we want to then go out and get some data to be able to answer that question. So number 7, suppose the NCAA rules that schools can choose to either pay their athletes or offer scholarships, but only one of them. Right? List the sports and characteristics of schools you would expect to be more likely to offer wages instead of scholarships. So this is where I just want you to get you to start to think, because I could make a bunch of different questions and say, here's something that's different between these two schools. Or here's these two different types of schools. What would be, compare their wages. So in the homework assignment, I did something similar to this. So one of the things you could think about is, let's think about higher wage characteristics. If we would expect there to be so in the homework problem, I kind of gave you two universities, Stanford and somewhere else. I said, what's one reason why maybe Stanford can get away with paying lower wages? Well, it's because they have a higher quality education. So a lower quality education would mean that students, because they're not getting this additional benefit of having a really high quality degree and being able to earn higher salaries once they leave college, once they're done playing, then at these higher quality institutions, supply is actually higher because people are more willing to play for those schools because of the value of the education. So at any given weight or at any given quantity of labor, they'd be willing to take a lower wage because they know they're going to get the additional benefit of this really high quality degree. So if supply goes up, that drives wages down, and so if we're looking for what drives wage, what will lead to higher wages, institutions with lower quality education would have to pay higher wages because they don't have this additional benefit of a high quality education that can lead to higher earnings after they leave. Okay. Another thing that we've kind of talked about leading to higher wages is just anything about the area in which the school is located. So, an example here, we just worked through one with a higher population, right? Drove the demand curve up and for labor, which drove wages up. Where basically anything that would impact the demand curve for the team in that area would also impact the demand curve for labor, right? Because it would affect the marginal revenue per win and drive demand for labor up. You can think about sometimes D3 versus D1. So the D1 school, so if we're thinking about Division 1 schools are likely to have the highest wages. Right? D3 schools will be able to offer as high wages because they don't have as high marginal revenue per win. What are some other characteristics we could think about? So let's say so if the tuition cost is lower at the school, then right, it makes more sense, right? It's not as a student looks at a tuition or a scholarship, and it doesn't matter as much if it's to a D3 school where they're only going to have to pay a couple thousand. It means a lot to get that scholarship if you're going to Notre Dame and paying $30,000-$40,000 a year, right? So areas that have lower tuition costs would have to be more likely to offer players higher wages to attract them, right? To be competitive in the market. What else would lead to higher wages? So if we think about the marginal revenue per win, you could also argue like higher, like here we go, Power 5. So Power 5 versus the non-Power 5 conferences. Those Power 5 conferences generating a lot of additional revenue. They have a lot stronger of a following, and so you would predict higher demand curve for labor, higher wages there as well. So these are some of the more common ones that we'd be looking at, or that I'd use examples of. I'm sure you could come up with a couple other qualities as well if you wanted to kind of continue this. Really, anything that drives the demand curve up or would shift the supply curve up as well, right? So kind of like we talked about for the players, attractive city characteristics to the players. So characteristics, right? Anything that drives supply, or sorry, not attractive, right? Anything that drives supply downward, right, pushes supply kind of to the left, or then if we have a decrease in supply, that would push wages up, and then anything that drives demand up, or kind of out to the right, would also push wages up. So any characteristics you can think of, but these are kind of the common ones that we think about. And it works in the opposite direction, right, as well. If I did higher quality education, lower population, D3 instead of D1, tuition is higher, non-Power 5, attractive, all of those would be things that drive the wages down, right, or predict lower wages for those schools, right? So really this is just thinking about kind of what's going on in that labor market if we open it up and be just like, any professional league. And I want to show you something here though. So all these things that would kind of drive wages up, why would it be that they'd be more likely then to pay wages if they have a higher wage? So notice, like, let's say, let's do the high-low tuition example, right? So quantity of labor, wages, right? So let's say I've got the supply curve of labor for Notre Dame and the demand curve for labor from Notre Dame, right? So maybe the equilibrium wage is something like even $20,000, right? But if I have to choose between offering either a wage or a tuition remission, well, if the value of the wage is $20,000, think about for the player. What do they actually get? Well, they would get $20,000 minus the $40,000 tuition. We'll check to see. I think this is actually probably somewhere pretty close to accurate. So they'd actually be still spending $20,000, right? Whereas if I just offer them a scholarship, the value that they're getting is the $40,000, right? Because they no longer have to pay it. Okay. So, or actually, you can think about it this way. Like even if they have the cost and they get the tuition, they're still at zero, right? They're paying off all these costs, so there's no additional tuition anymore. So they're receiving the 40,000, which means they can pay off the tuition. So zero is better than negative 20K. Right? So anytime, and I think the easier way to think about that is anytime you have an equilibrium wage, if whatever the value of tuition at that school is higher than that wage, you should always choose to offer the scholarship. Now, if you can do a combination of the two, that's a different story. But if I'm choosing between them, I would always, if the tuition is higher than the equilibrium wage, I would give them that. Now, let's say we have the supply curve for labor. Let's say, just in a crazy world, we have a D3 school, and the supply curve for this one, this particular player, he doesn't care. He go to Notre Dame, he go to D3 school, he doesn't care. There's no supply difference. But the demand curve differences for this D3 school, right? Maybe the wage is only something like 4,000, right? But their tuition is really, really low, something like 2,000. Well, then for that D3 school, right, if they just give the tuition remission, this person's out, has zero, right? They're covering all their costs. But if they give them the 4K and they still have to pay tuition, well, at least they're still up $2,000, right? And so I think that helps kind of show how the value of tuition, if it's lower tuition, I'd be more likely to pay them on the equilibrium wage. But even if I was in like a high demand area like Notre Dame, if the value of my tuition is really, really high and the equilibrium wages weren't higher than that, then I would choose to offer the scholarship. Right? And it would still be more attractive to the player to take that scholarship relative to just getting wages, if that's how the NCAA set things up. Right? Kind of a thought experiment, but okay. So 8, suppose the NCAA allows teams to pay players. What would paid to equilibrium wage and paid to and a number of high-quality players on high and low revenue-generating football programs? So really, I've kind of already done this, right? We just kind of talked through the higher revenue-generating football programs, right? The demand curve for labor is going to be higher, and it'll predict higher wages. I've kind of already drawn a couple graphs like this, so I probably don't have to go over this one again. We kind of went through it already in 5, right? Higher demand curve. It's just now instead of operating through city size, it's just operating through they can generate more revenue, right? We're just being strictly told marginal revenue per win is higher, right? So the demand curve for labor will be higher wages. So describe and compare the impact that this would have on competitive balance. Well, if higher revenue generating football programs are able to pay higher wages, then the high quality players are going to be more likely to choose them, right? If I'm choosing between two schools and one of them can offer me a higher wage to play football, unless I have some personal preferences about what program I'm going to, let's say I just care about kind of my wage, I'm choosing the one with a higher wage. And so these high revenue generating football programs are getting even higher quality players, which means they'll be even able to get higher demand and marginal revenue per win, which means they'll get even more revenue, so it's kind of this snowball effect. So you're going to have the better teams getting better, so it's going to really hurt competitive balance across the entire league. And if you think about it across the Power 5, well, you do have some, the variation that we would see within Power 5, there'd be less variation in the revenue that those teams can make. So if I looked at, say, let's look at the team of basketball, like IU compared to Ball State, the amount of money they can generate, well, that's going to be a much larger difference. And if I'm looking within the Power 5 conference of the Big Ten, well, even schools like IU might be able to generate a lot of additional revenue, or more than maybe Iowa, but not a whole lot more, right? They're a lot more similar, right? And so across the league, we would see competitive balance hurt pretty bad, but within the Power Five, it would probably be hurt, but not near as bad, right? And if we think about across the Power Five conferences, like same idea. There's not as much variation across the Power Five in terms of low and high revenue generating programs, so it probably wouldn't be impacted much at all. Right? Now assume the NFL eliminates the rule that players must be, and I use a basketball example here, and I think I wrote this for football, but so if you want to do the football example, maybe it's like even because IU football is maybe not the best example, but even IU football generates a lot more money probably than Ball State football, but across the Power Five there's less variation. So now assume the NFL eliminates the rule that you must be 2 years removed from high school to play in the NFL. Using your answer from Part A, depict how this could potentially eliminate high quality players from being on low revenue generating programs. So this one's kind of interesting to think about. But if I've got now I have like 3 choices for the player. So I could think about quantity, wage. Okay? And let's say the supply for labor is the same, kind of assume that constant, right? But there's no reason to believe that would vary unless we were told that there's different preferences to play for certain areas. So let's say we've got the demand for low revenue. We know that the demand for high revenue will be higher because that marginal revenue per wins is higher. So we got the wage for a high revenue, wage for a low revenue. Now let's say we introduce kind of the NFL now, right? Like now I don't have to just choose between, say, these high revenue generating programs like Alabama maybe. Well, maybe there's some teams in the NFL, right? Let's say this is low revenue generating teams in the NFL. Well, potentially this player, NFL low revenue, potentially the largest programs in basketball or at the collegiate level would be able to offer higher wages than the kind of low quality programs at the professional or NFL level. But now we can also think there's probably going to be some high revenue generating. Actually, sorry, I'll keep this consistent. So this was high revenue NFL. The higher quality or higher revenue generating programs in the NFL are probably going to be able to dwarf the wages paid by even the highest revenue generating programs in college. So you can think about how these low revenue generating programs at the collegiate level, there's no way they can compete with either higher low quality or higher low revenue generating programs at the NFL level, but maybe the top teams at the collegiate level could compete with some of the lower. So maybe not all of the high quality athletes leave college. A lot of them would no longer choose to go to these low revenue generating programs, but some of them would still choose to go to the high revenue generating programs at college versus the low revenue generating programs in the NFL. And so, it's kind of an interesting thought experiment there if they did eliminate that rule and they allowed colleges to pay players, what that might look like. Okay. All right. So I wanted to go through, and I added the one thing I wanted to go through into the one problem. We're looking at roster limits and how we should view those. And then also I wanted to kind of add into that one problem how we view tuition or scholarships or tuition admissions as opposed to wages. But I also wanted to go through something that might seem like it's pretty big, pretty review, but I just wanted to go over it one more time so you can understand it, because I saw a lot of people kind of get this one wrong, and maybe it's just an misunderstanding of the question on the homework. But when we're thinking about things like rookie minimums, right, why would the league be offering or arguing over rookie minimums? So let's say kind of the low quality, like rookie minimums are only going to be for your lowest quality players, right, your bench players or the lower quality. And so let's say this is where the rookie minimum wage would be, right, for that lowest quality player in the NBA. Well, the whole reason we set rookie minimums, they should be effective, like price floors, right, or minimum wages. We should say you shouldn't be able to pay a wage below this, right? So we can think about these as minimum wages when we're talking about rookie minimums, right? And so if it's an effective rookie minimum, so let's say it's set at something like 900,000, Well, then if they lower it, we're assuming that the whole reason these are set is because they are effective. It wouldn't matter that they even have a rookie minimum if it was, say, somewhere down here at like 50,000, right? Then it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter if they changed it. But what we're assuming when we say there are rookie minimums is that they are effective, like they're binding. They're effective minimum wages, essentially. So if they lower it, right, well, now we would go from this point where the demand for labor here would be something like this. So we'll call this demand 1. But now when we push that rookie minimum down, the new point, the new number of workers that we'll get is here at lower wages, which we're thinking about, I think the example I gave in the homework was, if we're thinking about age, what would this do? Well, it means there's going to be a higher number of rookies on teams, which rookies have a lower age than the average age in the NBA, and so we would predict that average ages is kind of decline. So these rookie minimums, or anytime we're talking about like a minimum, we're assuming it's binding. Same kind of thing if we did a player cap, right? So let's say instead we had something different, right? Let's say we did the reverse. The NFL has the reverse problem for high quality players, right? So you've got the supply for labor, you've got the demand for labor. Let's say that for like incoming quarterbacks, let's say we just look at the market for quarterbacks. It's something like, getting close to NFL draft here, so I guess this is a fun kind of poignant example. Let's say, I don't know. Actually, I'll make this as real as possible. I'll do a quick Google search. So I think before, highest rookie quarterback contract. So this was before they kind of had a collective bargaining agreement to make rookie salaries lower. So we're talking about something like, let's keep going. Let's go down to the top ones. Yeah, Sam Bradford, 76 and 72 million for Matt Stafford, right? They kind of got in right before they kind of started limiting these rookie contracts. So let's say that for a quarterback coming in, that equilibrium salary is $72 million, right? Well, there's a myriad of reasons. The players' union doesn't like this. It leaves less money for the rest of the players on the teams. It's also that these teams are likely bust, so sometimes it's just eating money away from the pool of money that could go to other players. And so they collectively bargain with the NFL, and the NFL likes to lower this as well. So they're both on the same side. They want this to kind of be, they're okay with paying a little bit less money as long as everybody has to pay less money. So they've set these, instead of kind of price floors, price ceilings, right? You can only pay up to this amount. So this is like our cap amount. Right? So if we set this cap, essentially what we're saying is, here's the quantity that we can, this is the number of players you would want to pay who are high quality at this cap, right? You wouldn't draft as many of these high quality players. You're not paying them as much, which is good, but you're also not going to draft as many of them, right? Because at some point, now if I decide that I want to draft this player and I have to pay them less money, or sorry, I'm saying this in reverse. With this new cap, I'd be more likely, right? Before, I would have wanted to get to this point, but now I would be willing to kind of hire all of these players. The problem is, these players don't want to work for these lower wages. So for everyone here, the wage is now too low to kind of compensate them from supplying their labor to the NFL. Right? Or when I say supply their labor, we could think about quality labor hours, right? So you can also think about if we remove the cap or we increase it, so you can pay rookies more. Well, now you're going to get kind of this increase in quantity. Maybe you see more rookies deciding to leave college earlier. Maybe you see just an increase in the quality of labor hours that you're getting from them. But cap works in a similar way, just kind of reverse to what these rookie minimums do, right? And they kind of keep supply. They both would keep supply lower. Okay. So that's a cap. We'll have caps and rookie minimums. So just the other ones I wanted to mention. There's one other thing. So I think that should be good. Because so roster limits, rookie minimums and maximums. Thinking about supply changes based off of player preferences for an area, and the other one I wanted to, just kind of how to break down those competitive balance ones when you have two competing effects. So that should cover it. Like I said, I'm planning on doing one more of these, kind of just reviewing some additional problems. I'll get some more problems up on Canvas here in the next couple days. Like I said, currently planning on doing that on Monday. I may film it. I wanted to do something live on Monday before the last day before you can get to the exam. But I may also have just record an additional one on Saturday as well. It might be short, but just going over more problems, just to give you as much content as you can get going into this thing. Okay. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Hopefully, like working through these problems helps. I'll get an answer key up. Like I said, I drew a lot of it on the board in these videos, but I'll also get one up that is kind of everything's in one place on Canvas. That should be up sometime tomorrow. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna stop the recording here.